So, first and foremost, class, before we proceed, let me ask you first a question. What do you understand, class, about the term bioequivalence? Narinig niyo na ba yung term na to? Bioavailability, I'm pretty sure. Nasabi na natin ilang beses na eh. Pero class, when you say bioequivalence, anong naiisip ninyo pag narinig niyo yung word na to? Or familiar ba sa inyo yung term na to, bioequivalence? Yes, Ms. Savines?
Parang sa akin, sir, yung amount ng drug po equal.
Equal sa? It's okay. It's okay. No problem. Alright. No problem. Okay, so tama yun. Okay, we can go with that. It has something to do with equality. Kaya tama yun. Kaya siya tinawag na bioequivalence. Okay, anyone else? Thank you very much, Ms. Savines. Okay, meron pa ba? Okay, sige. Class, familiar naman kayo siguro sa mga generic drugs natin, right? Kaya halimbawa, paracetamol. Bakit ang dami-daming brands ng paracetamol? Meron kang Calpol, Biogesic, Rexidol, Tempra, okay? Pero pare-pareho lang naman silang lahat na paracetamol, right? Okay? Now, class, bakit pinapayagan i-market yung mga ganon? Right? Now, normally, class, before you can apply for a generic substitution, or halimbawa, gagawa ka ng generic product mo, kailangan kasi ma-meet mo ng requirements ng bioequivalence. So, ibig sabihin, dapat ang product ko, which is my own paracetamol brand, okay, yung brand ko, class, should have the same bioavailability with that of the innovator product. Ano ba ang innovator product natin when it comes to paracetamol? Now, ang standard kasi, class, would be Tylenol. So, ibig sabihin, class, I'm going to perform a bioavailability, bioequivalent study comparing my drug product, okay, yung ima-manufacture ko, to Tylenol. At dapat, class, ang sasabihin ng statistics ko is that there's no significant difference between Tylenol and my drug product. Okay, siguro naman, class, familiar naman kayo sa mga statistics natin, right? T-test, ANOVA, mga ganon, right? Tama nga ba? Okay, ang purpose na naman, class, ng statistics is to find out if some data, if the given data have differences with each other. Okay, so pag sinabi class na no significant difference, ibig sabihin lang nun na ang paracetamol ko, yung manufacture kong paracetamol, is comparable to the gold standard for paracetamols, which is Tylenol. Sa Philippines nga lang, class, usually, since we don't have the brand Tylenol, oftentimes, ang Philippine FDA, ang comparator product niya is Biogesic. Okay? So, yun. So, that's bioequivalence, class. Tanda lang natin, ang bioequivalence, normally ginagamit siya for, okay? We normally use this class for, ano nung stylus ko? Aha. Sige, balik na tayo yan. Ayun, okay. So, bioequivalence class, tandaan nyo lang, it should be comparable. Okay? Drug X, sabihin natin drug X natin is comparable to innovator drug in terms of bioavailability. Right? So, for today's class, our objectives are as follows. So, first, to discuss the pharmacokinetic process that determines absolute bioavailability. Now, not only absolute, I'll also be teaching you guys how to determine relative bioavailability. You'll find out the difference between the two in a while. Okay, and second, to discuss the basic FDA requirements for approval of ANDAs, or abbreviated new drug applications, submitted by generic drug manufacturers. Again, class, abbreviated, ano ibig sabihin nito? What do you mean kasi when we say abbreviated? Pag sinabi natin kasi abbreviated, it means shortcut. Okay? Kasi class, when we do NDAs, new drug application, napakabusisi ng prosesong ito. Okay? And I'll show this in a while. Okay? Pero class, kung halimbawa, gagawa lang naman ako ng another paracetamol. Right? Sabihin natin obviously, yung patent ng paracetamol tapos na. Okay? It's been out in the market for so many years. So, wala na siyang patent. Tinanggalan na siya ng patent. Kaya once mawalan kasi class ng patent ang isang gamot, okay, dito ngayon mag-umpisa gumawa ng generic counterparts. Ano ba kasi ang purpose ng patents muna pala, bagong lahat? Patents. What do you know, class, about patents? Yes, Miss Kabalan? Kabalan, static yung sound. So, yung mic mo. Yan. Okay, good. Sige, try natin ulit.
Alam ko po, in-apply po yung patent once na nakadiscover ka po ng something para po ma-identify na ikaw po yung nagmamay-ari nun. Para wala pang gagaya.
Very good. Okay? So, tama yung class. Patents are used for intellectual property rights. Okay? Intellectual property. Pag sinabi natin kasi intellectual property, ibig sabihin, ako nakadiscover nito, so I have the right, okay, to do whatever I want with my discovery. Okay? So, class, obviously, medications always have patents. Yan ang laging hinahabol ng mga drug manufacturing companies makasecure ng patent. Kasi kung ikaw nakasecure ng patent, ikaw lang pwede mag-manufacture niyan, pwede kang mag-dictate whatever price you want. Okay? Kasi ikaw yung may-ari ng patent. Kaya nga, class, kadalasan, if you'll notice, especially in the US class, aggressive yung mga drug manufacturing firms dun for research. Kasi ang habol lagi nila is makakuha ng patent. Makakuha ng new drug. Alright? Kasi pag may new drug sila, nag-invest sila sa inyo, okay, tapos na-approve yung new drug na yan, okay, class, kaya nilang idikta kung gaano kamahal yung presyo ng gamot na yan. Because I have the intellectual property. Ang sasabihin lang ng manufacturer is, ganito yung presyo niyan kasi kailangan ko i-recuperate yung research cost eh. Yung mga na-invest namin research. Right? Pero in reality, sobra-sobra pa nakukuha nila doon. Okay? Kaya class, laging habol natin is to have a patent. And obviously, class, since it's a new drug, it's a new drug, mabusisi talaga yung requirements ng FDA dito. So, in terms of pharmacological studies, toxicity studies, animal studies, and so on and so forth. So, napakatagal na proseso nito at napakamahal. Okay? Now, say for example, class, Now, dahil ikaw may patent, so mahal ang presyo na pwede mo ibenta. Kaya ma-notice nyo yung mga anti-neoplastic drugs natin, napakamahal. Because majority of those still have their patents with them. Now, forever ba, class, ang patent ng isang bagay, ng isang gamot? Okay? For other stuff, class, like say, for example, softwares, so on and so forth, pwedeng forever ang patent yan. Pero for drugs, class, may limited time lang ang patents na pwedeng ipatong sa isang gamot. Okay, normally, class, kung hindi yan i-renew or hindi sila gagawa ng bagong salt form, okay, normally, class, a patent of a drug can last only for 5 years. Pag ni-renew nila, maximum of 20 years. Alright? Now, bakit, class, may limit ang patent ng gamot? Ang gamot kasi, tatandaan natin, is an essential necessity. It's an essential goods. Okay, essential siya, class, para mabuhay ang isang tao. Now, kung forever, class, may patent ang gamot na yan, di forever mamomonopolize nung manufacturer yung gamot na yon. Okay? And therefore, class, they can always dictate it at a higher price. Now, the purpose, class, why we remove or bakit may limit yung patent ng isang gamot is simply because we want to keep the cost of medications down. Okay, this is di lang to sa Philippine FDA, pati sa US FDA, other FDAs of other countries. Limited lang, class, ang patent ng mga gamot. Kasi nga, gusto natin, class, mag-introduce ng competition. Okay, in the form of generic drug manufacturers. Okay? Alam niyo naman kasi ang nangyayari, di ba, pag may competition, ang nangyayari sa prices ng gamot natin is bumababa. Okay? So, yung dating 500 pesos per tablet, minsan nagiging 100 pesos per tablet na lang. Okay? Now, class, kapag ikaw ay gagawa ng generic product, kailangan bang balikan ang buong proseso na ginawa nung innovator product? Kasi same drug lang naman eh. So, syempre, class, hindi mo na dadaanan pa yung parehong proseso na yun. Ang gagawin na natin, class, is isi-shortcut natin yung proseso mo. And that's where that's where the abbreviated new drug application comes into play. Okay, sa abbreviated new drug application kasi, class, ang gagawin lang dito is, hindi mo na kailangan ng toxicological studies, hindi mo na kailangan ng pharmacological studies, hindi mo na kailangan mag-undergo ng phase 1, 2, 3, 4 clinical trials. Ang kailangan mo lang gawin dito is a BE study. Sa bioavailability, bioequivalence study lang. Okay? Kasi makikigaya ka lang eh. Kumbaga, me too product ka lang. You're just a me too product. Alright? And your purpose, ang purpose nun is to introduce competition sa market para ma-drive ang presyo ng mga gamot to become lower. Okay? Notice class, magkano na lang ngayon ang paracetamol? Sa dinami-dami ng market, sa dinami-dami ng products sa market natin, na paracetamol, sa tingin nyo, class, magkano lang nabibenta ang paracetamol? Especially yung generic nila. May idea ba kayo kung magkano ang paracetamol ngayon? Yung generic?
By piece po ba, sir?
Ano lang, per piece. Magkano?
Parang, ang tanda ko po, nasa 6 pesos or...
Oh, that's Biogesic. Okay. Pero okay lang din yan. Sige. Yes, Biogesic cost around 6 pesos to 5 to 6 pesos. May iba nagbebenta 8 pesos. Depende sa lugar mo. Pero kasi mga generic product lang talaga. Kasi yung like Rexidol, ganyan piso. 2 piso. Okay, actually, pwede pang ibenta yun ng mas mababa. Pero kasi, pag binenta mo ng mas mababa ang generic product, okay, minsan, alam mo mga Pilipino, pag mababa ang presyo, iniisip nila cheap, hindi effective yan. Kaya minsan yung mga, pharmacies, yung mga butika natin, binibenta nila 200 times the amount. Okay, ang markup nila 300% para lang matabihan yung presyo ng branded generics natin dito sa Philippines. Okay, like Biogesic or Calpol. Okay, anyway, and then our next objective class, other than that, would be to discuss the basic study methods for bioequivalence, such as what are the study designs na ginagamit and the statistical analysis. Now, please take note, class. I won't be teaching you guys how to do statistics here. Okay? But I'll give you an idea on how this is usually done. Right? And the study design employed when doing bioavailability, bioequivalence studies. Now, what is bioavailability? Sabi, by definition, class, it's defined as the rate and extent to which the active ingredient or active moiety is absorbed from the drug product and becomes available at the site of action. Now, normally, class, sabi nga natin, di ba, we still remember, during our introduction part, it's impossible, it's impractical to get the amount of drug reaching the site of action. Kasi what if the site of action of your drug is in the heart? Alangan naman, buksan mo pa yung pasyente para lang tingnan yung amount of drug sa puso niya. Kukuha ka ng tissue sa heart niya. So that's impractical. It's possible, but it's impractical. So hence, class, sinasabi lang natin, ano na lang yung titingnan natin to determine the amount of drug reaching the body or the site of action. We just simply get the blood, okay? And then check the amount of drug reaching the bloodstream. Now, ang sinasabi nilang tapos natin afterwards would be whatever the amount of drug is in the blood, okay, is the same amount of drug reaching the reaching the target sites. Okay? At ano nga ba, class, yung principle na yun na ina-apply natin sa kinetics that states whatever the amount of drug reaching the bloodstream is the amount of drug reaching the target sites. Okay? If you can still remember, class, ano nga ba yun? Yes, Mr. Nesho.
Kinetic homogeneity.
Very good. It's what we call the kinetic homogeneity principle. Right? Now, of course, class, as we've mentioned also before, is it true all the time? So, sabi natin, hindi. Okay, na yung amount of drug reaching the blood is the same amount of drug reaching the target sites. It's not always true. Okay, like say, for example, digoxin. Diba si digoxin, class, most of the time, ang target niya talaga is the heart muscles. So, hence, konti na lang yung amount of drug reaching the bloodstream. Konti lang natitira sa blood. Kasi majority of that will go to the heart muscles. Okay, but those are just a few exceptions. Okay, now, when we talk about rate, class, oftentimes, ang kinetic parameter na gamit natin dito would be Tmax. And for the extent, ano nga ba yung extent? Ano yung kinetic parameter na ginagamit natin to measure the extent of drug absorption? Okay, we mentioned this sa intro. Yes, Mr. Nesho.
Sir, try pero hindi po.
Sure.
Cmax po.
Very good. Actually, one is Cmax. For Cmax kasi, class, it's both rate and extent. That's Cmax. Very good. Okay, but the other one, class, the more precise siya for extent lang is AUC. Right? So, thank you very much, Mr. Nesho. Okay, so AUC is the total amount of unchanged drug that reaches the systemic circulation, and it's used to calculate for your bioavailability factor, which is abbreviated as as F. Okay? So, still remember, class, one of our computations, di ba, sa AUC? Okay, yung pinakita ko sa yung technique, yung pag-given ka ng time, tapos yung time, and the given concentrations. Okay? So that's how we compute for AUC. Now, when you're computing for absolute bioavailability class, very important na parameter ang AUC, area under the curve. Okay, especially class if you're getting for absolute or what we call the or relative bioavailability. Now, this is the formula class for absolute bioavailability. It's the one. Pero oftentimes class, most often than not, okay, when you're doing BABE studies, rarely ginagamit ang absolute bioavailability. Bakit? Hindi lahat ng drug product sa market class may IV counterpart. Okay? Kasi ang isa sa mga requirements class for a drug to be for you to compute absolute bioavailability is that there has to be an IV counterpart. Eh what if ang drug product na yun started as an oral drug? Right? So, most often than not class, ang ginagamit natin to check for to do bioavailability studies would be relative bioavailability. Sa relative bioavailability kasi class, ang kailangan ko lang dito is, saan ba yan? Okay? A standard dose, standard formulation, okay, of the drug. Right? Now, normally class, kung ano yung available na product initially, yun lang din ang gagamitin natin. Now, kaya nga kasi nga nyo ha, bakit tinawag itong absolute bioavailability? Okay? Kasi nga, sabi natin, ang comparator natin is an IV. And remember class, ano ang bioavailability ng isang IV product? It's equivalent to how many percent ang bioavailability ng IV product natin? IV drug?
100%.
Very good, guys. It's always 100%. Hence, it's absolute. Okay, kaya yan class yung keyword na titingnan. Pag sinabing absolute bioavailability, ang comparator ko niyan would be an IV drug. Kumbaga yung denominator ko will be an IV drug. Hence, class, the formula is simply, okay, AUC ng drug product mo divided by its dose over the AUC of the IV counterpart niya, and the dose of that IV product. Alright? So, that's for absolute bioavailability. Ang denominator ko is the IV drug. Alright? Now, what about for relative bioavailability class? Ang pinagkaiba naman ito class is, since hindi lahat ng drug product merong IV counterpart, so therefore class, ang denominator na gagamitin ko dito would be the innovator product. Or what we call the standard. Okay? So, standard. So, kumbaga class, pag relative bioavailability is the extent of drug absorption upon extravascular administration in comparison to the dose size of a standard administered by the same route. Okay? Ang keyword here is, it should be administered using the same route of administration. Okay? Napanggaling mo. Okay. Alright. So, let's have your class a sample problem. Okay? Sige, ako muna magko-compute nito. Wait lang. Yun. Okay, madali lang naman, excuse me, madali lang naman kasi class ito as long as you have your AUC. Now, sa practice, mano-mano ba ang pag-compute ng AUC? Hindi. Okay, normally class may software na dyan. Pa-plot mo na lang yan, yung software na yung magko-compute para sa'yo. Okay, pero of course class, kaya ako tinuturo lang naman sa inyo kung paano i-compute is simply because I want you to understand the principle behind it. Alright? Pero in practice class, huwag kayong mag-alala. Again, may software na automatic yun. Pwede nga gawin to sa Excel na lang din eh. So anyway, here's a sample problem class. The bioavailability of a new investigational drug was studied in 8 volunteers. Each volunteer received either a single oral tablet containing 200 milligrams of the drug, 5 ml of a pure aqueous solution containing 200 milligram of the drug. Okay, pure aqueous ibig sabihin ito yung standard. Or single IV bolus injection containing 50 milligrams of the drug. 50 milligrams of drug. Plasma samples were obtained periodically up to 48 hours after the dose assayed for drug concentration. The average AUCs from 0 to 48 hours are given in the table below. From these data, calculate relative bioavailability and calculate for the absolute bioavailability. So, ang oral tablet natin, class, ang AUC niya is 89.5. Sulat natin dito yung dose. Okay, ano ang dose nito, class, ng oral tablet natin? It's 200 milligrams. Okay, pure aqueous solution natin, 86.1 ang kanyang AUC at ang kanyang dose ay 200 milligrams din. Okay, and then IV bolus injection is 50 milligrams. Right? So, how do we compute for this then? Okay. Keep muna natin yan. So, saglit lang. So, okay. Alright. So, remember, class, ano ang formula natin dito? Relative. Unahin natin si relative bioavailability. So, sabi lang naman natin dito, class, is that it's the AUC of your drug. Okay? Ano kayo papangalan natin dito? Tablet na lang. AUC tab over its dose. All over the AUC of your standard over its dose. So, doing that, class, ano ang AUC ng ating oral tablet? 89.5 divided by... Okay, ito, class, tingnan nyo, ha. Ang unit natin sa AUC is... tawag dito. It's in micrograms. Okay? Microgram hour per ml. Alright? Now, ang microgram hour per ml, class, okay, I don't know if you notice, pero we can actually convert this to milligrams. Okay? Saan na ba yun? Para lang mas mapadali tayo, baguhin na lang natin si AUC. Or pwede nyo naman i-convert si dose. Pero in my case kasi, class, normally when I see a microgram hour per ml, it's the same class as milligram hour per liter. Alright? Now, kaya pag nakakita ko nito, class, ang ginagawa ko, hindi ko na kino-convert yung dose to micrograms. Although you can do this, You can do this. Depende sa inyo. Pero in my case kasi, alam ko naman kasi na ang AUC is microgram hour per ml is equivalent to milligram hour per liter. Same na same lang yan. 1:1 ang conversion factor ng mga yon. Nang yon. Now kasi, class, after kung mag-compute dito for bioavailability, mawawalan kasi yan ng units. Magka-cancel out yung mga units ng lahat ng yan. Right? So, normally, class, basta milligrams ang dose ng gamot ko, hindi ko na ginagalaw yung AUC na microgram hour per ml. So, I'll just use it. I'll just write it as is. So, denominator dito is 200. All over, AUC ng standard would be 86.1 divided by 200. Okay? So, sulat natin, class, yung sulat natin yung units, just so you, para maniwala tayo. Milligram hour per liter. Milligram. Okay, milligram hour per liter. Tapos, milligrams. So, obviously, cancel tong dalawang to. Ang matitira nun dyan is hour per liter. Alright, so wait lang. 89.5 divided by 200. 0.4475 hour per liter. Tapos, 86.1 divided by 200. We get 0.4305 hour per liter. So, obviously, class, cancel yung dalawang yan. At ang magtitira is 0.4475. That would be 1.04. This is my relative bioavailability, 1.04. Now, if you want to make this class into percentage, obviously, ang gawin ko lang is multiply by 100%, and then you get 104%. So, anong masasabi ko, class, dito? Okay? Stroke ba? Ba't tayo mag-erase? Okay. So, ano masasabi ko ngayon dito, class? Okay, based on my relative bioavailability class, mas maganda pa pala yung oral product ko, yung oral tablet ko, kesa sa standard solution or sa standard drug product. Okay? It's 100%, it's 4% better in terms of bioavailability. It's 4% better than the standard product. Okay? So, yun yung relative bioavailability natin. What about for absolute? Okay. So, for absolute, same thing, pero ang denominator ko is IV. Okay? So, AUC pa rin ng tab ko over its dose. All over AUC ng IV over its dose. Right? So, hindi na ako magpapakita ng cancellations dito. Okay, alam ko ng 0.4475 to. 4475 divided by AUC ng IV ko, which is 37.8 divided by 50. 0.4475 37.8 divided by 50. 0.756. Answer, and we get 0.59, or we say times 100%, that's 59%. So, comparing my drug product class to its IV counterpart, okay, ang lalabas class is it's 59. Oops. Right. Ang lalabas dyan class is it's 59%. Ang bioavailability ng oral tablet ko is 59% as compared to that of the IV counterpart. Alright? So, sa tingin nyo class, when manufacturers or when generic manufacturers do bioavailability studies, ano mas prefer nila class? Absolute bioavailability or relative bioavailability? Sa tingin nyo class, pag magpapakita sa ng BABE studies. In your opinion, relative? Very good. Okay? So just so you know, class, thank you very much, Ms. Cabalan. Okay, that's true. It's mostly relative bioavailability studies. Bakit? Mas magandang tingnan sa papel ang relative BA. Okay? Kasi at saka class at the same time, sino bang kinakalaban ko dito? Eh, yung oral lang din naman. Okay? Ang hirap class kalabanin yung IV counterpart ng isang gamot because again, it provides you with 100% bioavailability. And most often than not, class, FDA only requires us to submit for generic manufacturers. They only require the generic manufacturers to submit relative bioavailability studies. Right? So, ayan. Anyway, so let's go back. Okay. So, what are the factors that affects bioavailability? Especially class, well, obviously, bioavailability naman is applicable for, what do you call this? Drugs that are administered extravascularly. Kasi syempre kung intravascular naman yan, no need to perform bioavailability studies. So what are the factors? Usually the physical or formulation properties such as its molecular weight, polarity, dissolution rate, stability in gastric acids. Gastric emptying plays a vital role. Okay? So class, question. Gastric emptying affects what? Is it the rate of absorption or the extent of absorption? Try nga natin, still remember? Okay. So gastric emptying. Does it affect the rate of absorption? Or does it affect the extent of absorption? Extent? Okay, sige. Thank you very much for trying, Miss Venus. Pero class, gastric emptying affects the rate of absorption. Okay, it's the rate. Why? If you still remember class, di ba? Where does absorption takes place? Where does absorption take place? Does it takes place in the no problem, Miss no problem, Miss Venus. Okay? Does it take place in the stomach or the intestines? Sabi natin, sa intestines nangyayari ang absorption. Very minimal ang absorption nangyayari sa stomach natin. So the faster a drug reaches the intestines, the faster will be the extent, the faster the drug will be absorbed. Okay? That's why class gastric emptying doesn't really affect the extent. Kasi sooner or later class, ma-absorb din naman yan as long as it reaches the small intestines. Right? Next one, metabolism in the intestinal wall, specifically the CYP3A4. Remember class, ang sabi ko dito before, CYP3A4 class is the enzyme, pinaka-culprit na enzyme that metabolizes most of our drug products. Okay? Next would be drug efflux from intestinal wall via the P-glycoproteins, right? Efflux mechanism, and then the hepatic first pass metabolism. Okay, those are just some of the factors. Now, what is bioequivalence? Bioequivalence class simply is defined as the absence of a significant difference in the rate and extent to which the active ingredient or active moiety in pharmaceutical equivalents or pharmaceutical alternatives becomes available at the site of drug action when administered at the same molar dose under similar conditions in an appropriately designed study. Now, tingnan nyo to absence of significant difference in the rate and extent. So, ibig sabihin class, if we do bioequivalence study, ano ang mga kinetic parameters na kailangan meron ako? Okay, so obviously, extent, kailangan ko ang AUC. And for the rate, ano ang kailangan kong kinetic parameter here? Okay? So when doing bioequivalence study, dapat ma-produce ko yung mga kinetic parameters na to. So 1, for extent would be the AUC, and for the rate, it should be the... Yes, Mr. Nesho?
Tmax, sir.
Very good. That's a Tmax. Pero class, to get, both, kunin mo na rin Cmax, syempre. Alright? Okay, so that's how we do bioequivalence studies. And when doing bioequivalence studies, class, tingnan nyo to it must be administered at the same dose under similar conditions. So, ibig sabihin, class, most often than not, when doing bioequivalence study, ang ginagamit natin dito is relative BA. Okay, we compute for relative BA. Alright? And the study must be appropriately designed. Now, some definition of terms lang, class, that you need to be aware of. Okay, we have the pharmaceutical alternatives. Narinig na ba yung mga terms na to? Parang napapaisip ko kanina kung dapat ko ba itong i-discuss inyo. Baka na-discuss na sa inyo. Pero sige, anyway, let's define it na lang din here. Pharmaceutical alternatives, okay, versus pharmaceutical equivalents. Mamaya may therapeutic equivalents pa tayo. Okay, when we say pharmaceutical alternatives class, these are drugs having the same active ingredient but may differ in their salt, ester, dosage form, or strength. Ano ang example class ng pharmaceutical alternative? Say for example, ang nasa reseta is paracetamol 500 mg. Wala kang isang tablet ng 500 mg. Okay, so anong ibibigay ko as a pharmaceutical alternative? Pwede kong bigyan yung patient ko ng 250 mg to make 500 mg, right? So kumbaga every dosing, 2 tablet ang kanyang iti-take. And that's a drug with different strength. Tama? Ang 500 ang kailangan niya pero 250 ang binigay mo. So that's a pharmaceutical alternative. Or, say for example, ang dose ng patient, ang nasa reseta is, paracetamol na lang tayo class para mas madali. Okay? 250 milligrams paracetamol tablets. Walang tablet sa butika mo. So sinabi mo, ma'am, bigyan na lang kita ng syrup. Kunwari lang Okay, although that's not really advisable. Pero just in case, pwede rin naman niya. Okay, so bigyan mo siya ng syrup. Okay, so 125 milligrams per teaspoon. So 2 teaspoon ang ipapa-administer mo every dosing interval. Alright? So different ang dosage form. Nasa reseta was tablet, pero ang binigay ko is syrup. So that's a pharmaceutical alternative. Gets ba, class? Okay. What about pag sabi natin pharmaceutical equivalent? Okay, pag pharmaceutical equivalent class, same active drug, same dosage form, same strength. Okay? Ang nagkakaiba lang, pwedeng magkaiba sa shape, color, excipients, release mechanism, packaging, labeling, or expiration dates. Another term class for pharmaceutical equivalents would be your generic drugs. Halimbawa, paracetamol tablet, 500 milligrams biogesic. Okay? A pharmaceutical equivalent with that would be paracetamol tablet, 500 milligrams Tempra. That's a pharmaceutical equivalent. Make sense? Okay? Hope that makes sense. Now, the last one class is therapeutic equivalent. Ano naman ibig sabihin pag therapeutic equivalent? Okay? This is defined by Drug Price Competition and Patent Term Restoration Act of 1984. It permits pharmaceutical equivalents to be considered therapeutically equivalent will have the same clinical effect and safety profile. So allows generic manufacturers to gain FDA approval via ANDA submission. And the ANDAs do not include preclinical data or proof of safety and efficacy and only have to prove bioequivalence. Okay? So yun yung magiging therapeutic equivalent. Normally, ginagamit ito for ANDA or Abbreviated New Drug Application. Okay? So yun, di ba sabi ko sa inyo class, bakit maiksi lang may limit ang patent term ng isang gamot. Kasi nga sabi natin, because it's an essential good, drugs are essential goods, we want to have competition in the market. Okay? At the same time, by having that competition class, it drives the prices of your drugs to become lower. Okay? And they do therapeutic equivalence here. Okay? And allows for ANDA. So again, class, kaya mas gusto ng some manufacturers, some generic manufacturers will just want to make generic drug products because they don't want to undergo the hassle of performing or doing the requirements of a new drug application. Okay? Kaya pag ANDA lang kasi, Abbreviated New Drug Application, tingnan nyo, no need for preclinical data, no need for safety efficacy data, only bioequivalence. Okay? Kaya ang daming manufacturing firms sa Philippines class na generics. Okay? Kasi napakadali lang ng gagawin nila. Although class, don't get me wrong, mahal din magpa-BA/BE studies. Okay? Before kasi class, I was actually part of a BA/BE team. Okay, so ito yung ginagawa namin lagi. We just compute for check namin kung ethical ba yung pagkuha ng gamot or time intervals, tama ba? Okay, so yun yung isa sa mga trabaho ko before. Anyway, so ayun. Now, what is the normal drug approval process? Okay? Pag investigational new drug pa lang kasi yan, class. Pag sinabi ng investigational new drug, sabihin, ginagawa pa lang yung product na to. So, halimbawa, class, whenever you do thesis, nagtitesis ba kayo ng plant samples? Are you guys doing that kind of thesis? Or mostly descriptive type of research ang ginagawa sa UMAC? Anyway, ano pa ang usual research na ginagawa sa UMAC? Gumagawa ba kayo ng experimental researches? Kasi alam ko si Doc Net, driver talaga siya ng mga descriptive type of research because they truly are very important, especially for an admin's perspective. Yes? Sino yan?
Sa research po sa parang i-take pa lang namin siya ngayong second sem po yata ng third year or mga first sem din po meron ng research.
Okay. So yung research na ginagawa nyo is mostly descriptive ba? Or may gumagawa sila na experimental?
Based po dun sa mga klase ko, sir, na laman ko, parang qualitative, quantitative din po yung mga research.
I see. Okay. So mostly, descriptive type of research, no? Okay, anyway. Now kasi, syempre kasi during my time, usong-uso ang mga drug discovery, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we always did researches that involves experimental design. Experimental research ang ginagawa namin. So most of the time, class, whenever you do experimental research sa pharmacy, that's actually a preclinical testing. Andyan yung synthesis, purification, animal testing. Kaya di ba sa pharmacology, may mga animal handling kayo? Okay, part ng lessons ninyo animal handling. Okay, kasi class that's in preparation for you to become ready for preclinical testing, to become a researcher for preclinical testings. Okay, then you do class short-term toxicity, long-term toxicity. So in my case class, sa graduate school namin, okay, since I'm an MS pharmacology student, okay, we do a lot of preclinical testings. Okay, and our research class are mostly catered towards preclinical testings. So gagawa kami ng mga short-term and long-term toxicity studies using rats and mice. Right? Anyway, so yan class ang requirement for investigational new drug. Now take note of the term, investigational pa lang. Investigational. And it takes approximately class 3 to 4 years. Kasi ang long-term toxicity, 1 year agad to. 1 year yan observation sa mga daga ninyo. Hanggang sa mamatay sila. Titingnan nyo kung ano mangyayari sa mga daga. Okay? And it takes a long time. Alright? So, once na nakapasa siya class sa IND, ibig sabihin napatunayan ko na kaya ko siyang i-isolate. Okay? At safe for animal use ang aking gamot, then I can now proceed to the various phases of clinical trials. Ito yung mag-umpisa. Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3 clinical trials. Now, I won't discuss this one by one. I'm pretty sure familiar na din naman kayo sa mga Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3 clinical trials. Now, once nakapasa ka kasi dito, class, up to Phase 3 clinical trials, FDA will approve. Okay? FDA will approve your research. Okay? Kung fit for human consumption ba to? And then the sponsor address reviewer comments. Okay, sponsor class kung sino yung nag-sponsor sa clinical trial na yan. Usually that's the manufacturing company. Right? And that's where we start to do a new drug application process. Okay? Then, afterwards, final approval na lang yan for Phase 4 clinical trials. Ano nga ba class ang meron sa Phase 4 clinical trials? Okay? Anyone? Ano nga bang... okay, let's go. Okay. Ano nga ba kasi meron during Phase 4 clinical trials? Familiar ba? Yes, Mr. Reyes.
Try ko lang po, sir. I think pag Phase 4 na po, ginagamit na po yung drug for the general population.
Very good. Very good. Okay? Phase 4 class, ang tawag nandito is the post-marketing surveillance. Okay? Post-marketing surveillance. Ibig sabihin, out na sa market yung drug product ko. Now, it's still part of the clinical research, a clinical trial, kasi you're trying to look at the effects of the drug once given in the general public. Okay, general population. Right? Kaya nga di ba ang dami nagsasabi pag bago ang gamot, wag niyo raw munang gamitin kasi part ka ng clinical trial. Well, there's truth to that. Okay, well, there is truth to that. Alright? So, yun. Now, class, kung ako naman ay mag-ANDA, abbreviated new drug application, gagawa ko ng generic product, hindi ko na kailangan daanan ito. At saka ito. Rekta na ako dito sa FDA review. At ang kailangan ko lang i-submit is a bioequivalence study. Alright? So, yun lang ang kailangan ko i-submit dito. Then I'm done. Okay. Now, for investigational new drug class, as under Federal Food and Drug Cosmetic Acts, no drug can be distributed across the state or in the Philippines prior to final FDA approval. So, kailangan mag-undergo muna siya talaga ng FDA review process. Now, IND grants an exemption to sponsors in order to conduct clinical trials. So, there are 3 types. Investigator IND, Emergency Use IND, and Treatment IND. Okay? Now, ito usually yung may mga exceptions. Kumbaga, or na-fast track yung kanilang approval process. Halimbawa, class. Okay, familiar kayo sa ating vaccines for COVID, right? They actually use emergency use IND. Bakit emergency use? Kasi nga, may pandemic. Okay? Kaya na-fast track yung approval process ng vaccines natin. Pero class, pag sinabi bang fast track, ibig sabihin ba ito, bara-bara ang paggawa? Yung review process nila, bara-bara ba ibig sabihin nito? Kasi yun yung sinasabi ng ibang ayaw magpa-vaccines eh. Sabi nila, ay, na-fast track yan. Ibig sabihin, may minadali. Yeah, pag Pilipino, pag sabi minadali, ibig sabihin, hindi na chinek for quality, in-assess, blah, 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 ganyan-ganyan. Okay? So, no. Bakit mo nasabing no, Miss Avinas?
Ang pagkakaintindi ko dun po kasi, sir, sa fast track, parang prioritize siya ng group of professionals. Ganun
Yes.
po.
Very good. Okay? Specifically, class, kumbaga, ginawa siyang priority ng FDA. Ng review team ng FDA. Kasi class, normally, it takes approximately 3 to 4 years, probably. 3 to 4 years, class, bago ma-review ang isang IND, Investigational New Drug Process. Pero dahil marami kasi nagsasubmit ng new drug, for IND, Investigational New Drug, ang nangyari, class, sa vaccines natin was, pinatigil lahat ng review process for other drug products. Nag-focus lang sila for vaccines. Kaya, class, natapos siya within 3 to 6 months. Kasi wala silang in-entertain na ibang produkto. Kasi ang nireview ibang products, tumigil kayong lahat. Kasi mag-focus lang ang FDA sa vaccines. Kaya ayun. Right? So yan. So, pero class, still, most investigational new drugs must include, kung mag-submit ka class ng IND, you need to have animal pharmacology or toxicology studies, manufacturing information, detailed clinical testing plan, such as your protocol, and then your investigator qualifications. Okay? Now, kadalasan, class, kapag ikaw ay mag-ANDA, okay, obviously, wala itong animal and toxicology studies. Tapos, ang clinical protocol mo lang dito would be for a BA/BE study. Now, for new drug application, excuse me, so usually submitted after clinical testing and must include substantial evidence of safety and efficacy. Very important yan. Results of both animal and human testing. So for the human testing, andito yung phase 1 to 3 clinical trials. Okay, proposed labeling or package insert. Proof of adequate good manufacturing practices to maintain USP standards for drug identity, strength, quality, and purity. So if that is a new drug class, you need to be able to make a standard on what is the identity of a good quality pure substance ng drug mo. And duration of FDA review, a regular review must be completed within 12 months. Okay, for NDA na to Pero if a fast track yan, should be completed within 6 months. Okay? For our vaccines, parang 5 months ata inabot. Okay, 5 or 4 months, I'm not sure. Pero it usually that never extends beyond 6 months. That's for fast track review. Now, for generic drugs, ANDA, abbreviated new drug application. So here, class, active ingredient was already approved under the original sponsor NDA. So generic manufacturer only requires to demonstrate bioequivalence. Yun lang ang kailangan niya. Typically, 24 to 36 healthy volunteers in a double-blind, randomized crossover trial. Okay? I'll explain this later. Ito yung study design The study design often used for bioequivalence studies would be a double-blind, randomized crossover trial. Okay? Now, pwede ito class gawin under single-dose fasting. Pwede rin steady-state fasting or single-dose fed or fasting states. Depende yun. Pero normally, class, when you do bioequivalence studies, it's usually done as single-dose fasting. Okay? Pag steady-state fasting, ano ang kailangan gawin, class, pag steady-state fasting? Ilang doses ang ibibigay? Isa? Isang dose lang ba? Dalawa? Or multiple dose?
Multiple po, sir.
Very good. Multiple dose. Kasi nga, anong requirement, class, to reach steady-state concentrations? Yes, Miss Pihoto? Yes, Angelica?
Ay, sorry po. For us to reach the steady state po, kailangan po muna mataas po ng dose and then, ayun po yung loading dose and then, tsaka po mag-maintenance dose para po ma-reach na po yung steady state po.
Very good. Okay? And, question lang din, how many half-lives does it take to reach steady state concentration? Yes, Miss Mihoto pa rin.
4 to 5 hours.
Yan. Yun ang isa sa mga pinaka-importante dito eh. You need to continuously give the drug, okay, until you reach 4 to 5 half-lives. Right? Pero class, yun na nga, multiple times ibibigay ang gamot sa steady state fasting type of trial. Okay? Pero normally class, when we do bioequivalent study, it's just single dose. Isang dose ang ibibigay sa'yo. Not unless required talaga na mag-steady state sila. Okay? Pwede rin naman at a fed state, pero rarely do we do this. Now class, why do we give drugs for bioequivalence why do we give drugs in a fasted state? Ibig sabihin, gugutumin mo talaga yung pasyente mo. Naka-fasting sila class 8 to 10 hours of fasting. Bakit sila ginugutom? Okay? Ginugutom sila class because remember, ano yung isa sa mga factors that could affect bioavailability? Gastric emptying. Pag may contents kasi ang GI tract mo, it can greatly affect yung amount of movement ng drug product natin. So, naapektuhan din yung rate of absorption. Okay? Kaya normally, fasted state yung patient natin. Alala ko dati class, ang common na reklamo, ang madalas nakikita na yung problem, since pinafast namin yung mga patients, okay, during BABE study, nangyayari, ang reklamo nila is nahihilo daw sila. Okay, well, we know that it's not part of the drug. Hindi yung drug nagkakos ng hilo, pero nahihilo sila dahil gutom na sila. Kaya hindi namin sila pwedeng pakainin kasi kailangan pa silang i-fast. Alright? So, kaya laging part ng report namin for adverse drug reaction, dizziness. Kaya kasi madalas makikita niyo sa mga, ADR sa mga gamot, right? Dizziness. Sometimes it's because of the drug, sometimes gutom lang talaga yung pasyente mo during the time ng phase 1 clinical trial or during the BABE study. Yan. Anyway, kaya common yun na listed side effect. Doon ko lang na-realize, kaya pala maraming dizziness, headaches, kasi gutom lang pala yung pasyente during the clinical trial. Okay, so ano yung study design natin? So sabi natin class, ang study design na gamit natin here is a randomized 2-sequence 2-period crossover type of trial. Okay, ano ibig sabihin nito? Randomized, ibig sabihin, every subject gets both treatments, either your drug product or the standard drug product. Okay, half gets the generic drug product first, while the other half gets the branded drug first. Minimize the sequence effect. And this is done randomly. Okay, usually class via a fishbowl method. Or kung may software ka na randomizer, which is often used naman by most manufacturers, tapos naka-code yung mga patients. Coded sila. Hindi sinusulat yung pangalan nila because we have to protect their identity and to avoid bias. Alright? Normally, class is also double-blinded. Okay? Pag sabing double-blinded, hindi alam ng patient kung anong tinitake niya. Kung yan ba ay yung new drug product or yung standard drug product. Then also, class, pag double-blinded, pati yung nagbibigay ng gamot, yung researcher, hindi alam kung yung binibigay niya ba ay yung standard drug product or yung research drug product. Okay? Crossover. Each subject serves as his or her own control. Minimizes inter-subject variability. So, few subjects required to achieve adequate statistical power. When we say crossover design class, okay, ganito yan. Hatiin ang group of people into group A and group B. Group A gets the drug. Okay, si drug X. Group B would be the standard. Okay, standard drug. Alright? So, dalawang groups yan. Tapos, this is randomly assigned. This will be randomly assigned. Okay? Now, class, pag sinabi natin crossover design, after 1 week, sabi natin after 1 week, si group A naman ngayon ang makakuha ng standard. At si group B naman ang drug X. Palitan naman sila ngayon. Okay? Bakit kailangan yung 1 week na to? Ang 1 week na yan, class, is your washout period. Okay? Ano ibig sabihin ng washout? Para, class, after 1 week, matanggal yung amount of drug in their system. Para pag nag-reintroduce ng bagong gamot, malinis yung katawan ng pasyente natin. Or ng subject or patient. Okay? These are volunteers, pero they're actually paid very well. I remember, class, kasi ang when you do BAB studies, oftentimes we try to avoid using female subjects, not unless the study protocols calls for a female subject. Oftentimes, class, we use male subjects. Bakit? Hindi sila nabubuntis eh. Okay? So, yun lang naman yun eh. Mas madali kasi, tas walang regla ang lalaki. Okay? Mas madaling gamiting volunteer ang mga lalaki kaysa sa babae. Okay? Ayun. So, again, class, ayun nga pala. So, another thing, class, we call them volunteers, pero they actually paid. They're paid, class, for every blood extraction they do. So, class, kung 20 blood extractions yan, normally, per blood extraction, class, ang minimum dyan is 500. So, 500 times 20, about 10,000 pesos. Ang kinikita ng isang volunteer, kinikita isang volunteer during ABABE study. Right? Tapos, depende pa yun sa protocol. Again, kung kailangan, mas marami pang blood samples. Kaya kadalasan, class, yung mga namin, yung mga subjects namin during BABE studies, mga college students na lalaki. Sabi nila, ginagamit daw nila yung pera na yun pang tustos ng kanilang pag-aaral. Alright? Nga naman, isang araw ka lang, mauupo ka lang dyan. Wala kang gagawin talaga, class. Gugutumin ka lang saglit. Tapos lalagyan ka lang ng Heplock para makunan ka ng dugo. May 10,000 ka na agad. Kaya marami kaming suking volunteers. Tatanungin kami lagi, sir, meron ba kayo ulit, may study ba kayo ulit? Sali kami, sir. Anyway, so nag-volunteer naman sila eh. Pero we're not, of course, coercing them to join. It's voluntary. Right, so next one, class. Ayun, so yun yung crossover design. So the treatment period should be separated by a washout period by at least 5 half-lives. Kasi after 5 half-lives, class, approximately 96% of drugs are lost. Are lost in the body. Okay, approximately 96%. And minimizes the carryover or residual effects. Now, when you start to sample class biological specimens, okay, normally about 12 to 18 samples, okay, in each subject spanning at least 3 drug elimination half-lives. Okay, sorry, 12 to 18 samples. E minsan 20 pa talaga yung request. Sampling should be spaced to allow accurate estimation of Cmax. Okay, and a minimum of 3 to 4 samples during terminal log linear phase to accurately estimate your slope. Okay? So yung slope na yan, class, ito yung sigma z. Yung elimination rate constant niya. And this is what we get. Now, studies that would require bioequivalent studies. Okay. So normally, class, if your drug product is an oral solution, elixir, syrup, or tincture, no need to perform bioequivalent studies. Why? Generally, wave na yan. Okay, no need to do BABE studies. For solutions, elixirs, syrups, and tinctures. Why do you think so, class? Anyone, may idea ba? Okay, sige, di bali na. So, class, solutions, elixirs, syrups, tinctures. Anong napapansin nyo sa bioavailability ng mga to? These are drug products. These are drug dosage forms with... Okay. Class, these are drug products with good BA. Normally, class, approximately 90 to 99% bioavailability yung mga yan. So, hence, class, there's no need to do bioequivalent studies. Kasi expected na, class, na maganda ang makukuha mong results ng bioavailability dyan. Oral suspensions and immediate release solid dosage forms would usually require a single dose fasting, giving the highest strength possible. And for extended release solid oral dosage forms, normally, single dose din, pero all strengths are used. Pwede rin multiple dose at steady state. Or single dose fast or fed state. Pero given the highest strength. Oops. Alright? Okay. So again, class, exceptions sa bioequivalent studies are the solutions, elixirs, syrups, and tinctures. So for single dose fasting, usually PK parameter to be submitted, subject, period, sequence, treatment, plasma concentration at different time points, okay, measures of systemic absorption. So it should reflect the rate and extent of absorption. So hence class, kailangan mo dito ng AUC, Tmax, and you also get the Cmax. Statistical analysis class will be done as well, okay, of the AUC from 0 to T, AUC from infinite time, and your Cmax. Titingnan mo kung, dito, no significant difference sila. Again, AUC from 0 to T, AUC from 0 to infinite time, and then Cmax for single dose fasting. Pag multiple dose naman class, alright, same thing ang kailangan, pero ito pa yung mga isa sa mga requirements dyan. Kailangan mo yung dosing interval, okay, Cmax, Cmin, alright, mamaya pag-usapan natin ito class kapag paano mag-compute ng multiple dosing, C average, degree of freedom or fluctuations, and then your swing. Now, I won't require you class to compute for this, pero ang statistical analysis here will be done for AUC from 0 to the dosing interval, and then Cmax lang. Ang AUC class from 0 to dosing interval, ganito kasi itsura niyan eh. For dosing interval, ganyan siya. Kasi multiple times mo ibigay. So, AUC lang ng isang ganito ang kukunin natin. Okay? For single dose, fasted or fed state, same thing lang naman ang requirement dito ng single dose fasting. And same thing lang din ang i-analyze natin. AUC from 0 to T, AUC to infinity, and your Cmax. Now, to demonstrate for bioequivalence class, okay, ang requirement lagi natin dito would be to do ANOVA, analysis of variance. So, statistical comparison of generic to brand, Cmax, and AUC. So, kailangan yung Cmax and AUC niya must be of no significant difference. Okay? So, evaluates potential confounding effects of 4 factors: sequence, period, subject, treatment. So, Cmax and AUC are log transformed prior to analysis. Kasi natural log siya. Okay? Para mag-fit sa semi-log natin. Okay? ANOVA is based on the assumption of normal distribution of data. Most pharmacokinetic parameters have a skewed distribution. Hence, log transformation makes it more normalized. It normalizes it. Normally, ang log transformation na ginagamit natin